Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman of the Football History Dude podcast, and I'm stopping by this show real quick to tell you about a couple of cool giveaways that we have going on here at the network. Both are autograph books covering various topics of the NFL. The first is The Point After: How One Resilient Kicker Learned There Is More to Life Than the NFL by ex-NFL kicker Sean Conley. It goes over his unique experience as a walk-on kicker at the University of Pitt after never playing high school football. And then it gets into some of his time playing for NFL teams and so much more beyond the gridiron. The other is from author Kevin Bryant. His book is titled Spies on the Sidelines: The High-Stakes World of NFL Espionage. This book started as a curiosity, kind of a passion project to understand everything revolving around, well, Spygate. But this put Kevin down a rabbit hole learning about all sorts of espionage that has occurred throughout the history of the NFL. Both permissible and often the illicit techniques of gathering intel to try to impact the outcome of the game. To sign up for your chance to win an autographed copy of one of these books, all you gotta do is head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways and sign up. That's sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways. Again, check out all the other podcasts that we have in the Sports History Network as well. But now, back to your regularly scheduled journey to the sports history timeline.
We have a great program on tap for you today. We're going to go back 100-some years ago and talk about some great Harvard football teams coached by Coach Percy Haughton. Dick Friedman is an author that's wrote a biography on him, and he's coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with PigskinDispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pigpen, your portal of positive football history. And we're going to stare down that portal today and go way back, probably 125 years or so, back into the East Coast of football, where football started. And we have a gentleman that's wrote a book called The Coach Who Strangled a Bulldog: How Harvard's Percy Haughton Beat Yale and Helped Reinvent Football. That's, of course, author Dick Friedman. Dick Friedman, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Darren. It's great to be here.
Yeah, Dick, it's very interesting to have this talking about Coach Percy Haughton, because we have not covered him in our program. And we have, probably about 1,000 different podcasts on. I can't believe I've never had anybody talk about him before. So I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about Coach.
Well, I got to say, I think I won't say he's totally lost to history. He is, of course, in the College Football Hall of Fame. So if you're in the College Football Hall of Fame, you're out there. You're a figure. But he's because he did most of his coaching before World War I. Before the age of the newsreels, I think to some degree he is lost to history. For instance, he's not nearly as famous as Knute Rockne, who followed him along and is now the most important coach in American college football, arguably. I mean, I guess you could also, invoke Bear Bryant and maybe even Nick Saban at this point. But in any event, with Percy Haughton, he was a figure who did his greatest work really by 1915. And, and then the United States went to World War I. And after that, things changed. And then Percy, except for a very brief stint at Columbia, was out of the game. So in any event, he is a kind of a distant figure, maybe more distant than he should be.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. I think, and I can see that your passion, and you're talking about the passion about Coach Haughton. And I'd like maybe to get some of your background to tell us why Percy Haughton is a person of interest that you would write a book about?
Well, it's very interesting, Darren, because I grew up 8 miles from Harvard Stadium in Newton, Massachusetts. I started going to Harvard games when I was 7 years old in 1958. And then I actually went to Harvard and graduated in 73. And of course, went back most seasons to see games, either at the stadium or when they were on the road. But interestingly enough, it took an assignment when I was working for Sports Illustrated, which I did for 18 years. I was working on the college football coffee table book that Sports Illustrated did about 12, 13 years ago now. And a piece of copy came in front of me, written by my colleague, David Sabino, and it was Harvard's Percy Haughton was 71-7-5 in Cambridge from 1908 through 1915. And I looked at it and I went, holy, and then I won't say the next word that I said, holy blank, I've known this my whole life. Has anybody ever written a book about this guy? And I did a little investigating, and the answer was no. Nobody had written a book about him, although he had been part of a few other books. And I said, wow, I said, this got to be worth something. This particular era, especially of Harvard football that he coached, was an amazing era with some amazing players. So there's got to be something there. And, you know, a lot of people that I talked to didn't really think there was anything there, or they were sick and tired of hearing about Harvard. And there's a lot going on. Nevertheless, when I did a little more investigating, the thing that I found was, aside from the out and out record, which is amazing, there was really a great story about this guy and about the players that played for him. You know, he turned out to be an absolutely seminal figure in the beginnings of what I call modern football. And the more I got into it, the more fascinated I got. And then I discovered that he had written a book, which is now 100 years old, exactly this year, called Football and How to Watch It. And I read the book, and it's actually available on Google Books. And I recommend it to anybody to read it because it's fascinating. And basically, the book 100 years later holds up amazingly well. I mean, the one thing that is not as big a part of it as is in the game now is passing. You know, that was not nearly as big a part of the game. It was just coming in the 20s, and certainly was not as well developed as it became even 10 to 15 years later. But the rest of it it's as if he could write it, as if he had written it last week. And so the more I looked and the more research I did, the more I was convinced that there was something there. And then the other thing that I found was one of his great assistant coaches, who was actually his backup fullback at Harvard as well, a guy named Reggie Brown, was his advanced scout and did notebooks. And these notebooks were suddenly hiding in plain sight at, of all places, Notre Dame. And
really,
Notre Dame, I got in contact with the librarians at Notre Dame, and they sent them to me on loan. And again, reading, what he did was he had all sorts of diagrams and plays, of like if he would be scouting Yale for the game, and he would be scouting, and he'd go to Yale practices, and he'd put their formations down and everything. And, again, the more you look at it, I was going, wow, what a treasure trove this is.
There's got to be a story behind it. How did the assistant coach at Harvard's notebooks, playbooks, basically, end up at Notre Dame? There's has to be Newt Rockne had to do something with this.
Well, it's possible. The other thing that's and I actually asked that question of a few people, and what they said is that often things are sold to collections various collections, and then the schools will buy the collection. And that's probably what happened.
That makes perfect sense. So
yeah. But anyway, you look at these things, and these things are, 110 years old now. And you're amazed at the sophistication of the game already, right? I mean, that in fact, everything as I kept researching, that was one of the main things that came through to me, was how even back in 1910, 1915, the game, the scouting, the media, of course called the press then, were already amazingly sophisticated. And, again, I said, there's a lot going on here that's plenty for me to write about. And sure enough, I almost got lost in the research. As you well know, that happens to all of us. Mm-hmm. We go down the rabbit hole, and the next thing you know, we forget to write the book. But luckily, that didn't happen, and that's how the Coach Who Strangled the Bulldog came to be. So anyway, it was a great experience for me. And the other thing is that it got me some cred among the Harvard athletic department. And I ended up being, since 2014, I've been the Harvard Magazine football correspondent.
Really? Nice.
Yeah. I mean, when I was on the East Coast, I would go to as many games as I could. Now that I've been on the West Coast, I've been streaming the games on ESPN Plus. I got to say, it's not a bad way to be a correspondent. I mean, you get almost as much as you need, almost better than being there. And I write up a little report after every game, and it's been a lot of fun. And it's also kept me in touch with a lot of people back at the school, which is wonderful.
And that's got to be fantastic, being your alma mater too. That's really special.
Yeah. No, it's been great. And the other thing is, I've gotten to meet and talk with the coach at Harvard now, who is Tim Murphy, who is a tremendous coach, and I have judged him the greatest coach in Harvard football history, even greater than Percy Haughton. And I give him the nod, partly because Murph has been at it for 28 seasons now, whereas Percy only did it for 9, or 8. So, no, I guess it's 9. So, Murph has won like 9 Ivy League championships, and is a tremendous football coach. But anyway, so between one thing and another, it's been a tremendous experience for me.
Well, yeah, congratulations. That's a great honor, and especially to be staying in touch with your alma mater and stay in touch with football, even though you're on the other coast. Now, Dick, let's get a little bit into the Percy Haughton's background. How did he get involved in football?
Percy went to Groton, fabled prep school, and Percy was a member of the class of 95. That's 1895 at Groton, and then went on to Harvard, and he was in the class of 1899. And Percy was a star athlete at Groton, one of the greatest athletes. Even today, he is ranked still one of the greatest athletes that Groton ever had. He was a big, tall guy, very lean, very limber. He himself was a tremendous punter, but his actual favorite sport, and remained so, was baseball, where he was a great center fielder for both Groton and the Crimson. And he loved baseball players for his football team. That's what they always said, that as soon as he saw a great baseball player, a lot of them already were great football players, but he would try to convert them into football players. Anyway, he became went on to Harvard and played fullback for the Crimson. And this was a time when Yale was totally dominant in football in the 1890s and early 1900s. A really great golden age for Yale. They were the Alabama of their day, really. he was involved in one game in 1898 when his punting helped Harvard win a rare victory. But, again, when you have a rare victory in these series, people really do remember it. And then he went on after college, after Harvard, he went on and coached at Cornell for a couple of years. And he actually succeeded a coach that you may have heard of named Pop Warner. And then Percy went back to Boston, coaching not being a well-paid profession at that time. Percy went on back to Boston and worked in the bond business. And at the time, Harvard was kind of struggling, losing to Yale. And finally, people in Cambridge got fed up. And, they went after Percy and they said, how would you like to take over? And he said he would, with one condition. And that condition was that he had total control. He was not going to take it if people were going to be kibitzing over his shoulder. And sure enough, they were so desperate that they grabbed him. And the first year, he beat Yale. He on some polls back then, or some newspapers named him national champion, named Harvard national champion. They were 7-0-1. They were undefeated, and Percy had achieved his cred, and from there on in, he had a successful run after that. But again, it was his way or the highway, and he really systematized football. He really broke the game down and kind of modernized it. A lot of the things he innovated or made popular, at least, are things that we see coaches still doing today.
Okay, now with that story there with him, beating Yale sort of right out of the chute with the coaching, is that where the title to your book came from? Strangling the Bulldog?
Yes, it was that particular game. Okay. That Yale game in 1908, when Percy they went to Yale. They traveled to Yale. The game was at Yale Field back then. The Yale Bowl was still a few years away from being built, and Percy, always a great motivator, he decided that he would strangle a bulldog. Of course, that being Yale's mascot. What he did was, though, he had a bulldog being towed by at the back of a car, and this, however, was to allay the PETA fans who might be listening right now. This was not a live bulldog. This was a paper mache bulldog. And Percy grabbed it by the neck, said, this is what we're going to do to Yale. And the team laughed like crazy. But the legend grew that Percy strangled the bulldog. And of course, then he did so metaphorically 3 days later when they upset Yale with the mighty score of 4-0, thanks to a field goal by a guy named Vic Kennard. So, that was the whole birth of it. But whenever I would tell people that I was working on this, people would say, "Oh, isn't that the guy that strangled the bulldog?" So after a while, I began to think, maybe I should make more of this. Than my working title was things like Crimson Autumns and whatever. And I went, something, this strangled the bulldog thing, we got to get it right out there, front and center. And sure enough, that's what we did. But
it's a catchy title, and it's one that's unique and different from anything else you read, especially in football books. So that's great, though. It really caught my eye when I saw the title.
Well, that was, the editors were happy that I came up with it. The editors of the book, because they were starting to worry that this thing was going to sound very, very plain vanilla, So, I understood what they said, being an editor myself for many years. You got to get something to grab the reader in, pull the reader in.
Yeah, so, you only have that 1.8 seconds to grab their attention, and once you do, you got them, right?
That's right. That's it exactly.
Now, I find it's real interesting going back and looking at some of these records of some of these teams, especially the Eastern teams, and you see, Yale and Harvard and Princeton and Penn, and especially Yale and Harvard, always being that last game, sort of right around Thanksgiving, last game of the season. And usually, everything was hinging on who was going to be, the top team in the land, especially when they, people like Park H. Davis and the Billingsley Report and Helms Report and the rest of them went back retroactively and looked at these teams. It sort of came down to that game would determine who would be the national champion or co-national champion at the time. And is Harvard and Yale, is that still like the last game of the season under?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That is still called the game, right? You don't even need the big game, which is what Cal and Stanford have out here. But no, the game is the last game of the season. And a lot of years, one or the other of the teams has a mediocre record or worse. And if they can upset the hated rival, then the season is a relative success, and it's, it's still, the one that really counts. And for many years, you're right. It did have implications, either in the early days, national championship implications. Nowadays, since 1956, since the formation of the Ivy League, often it has had Ivy League championship implications of one or both teams involved, with the chance for the title. So there's a lot at stake. I know the coaches feel it, tremendously, the pressure tremendously. They think about it. They probably worry about it because they know that's the one the alumni think about. And it's a yardstick for the alumni. And it's also the biggest attendance in the Ivy League. Almost every year, it's the biggest attendance when it's at Yale, especially, because at Yale you might have as many as 55 or 60,000 people at the game. Harvard's a much smaller stadium, but usually is sold out nevertheless. So it's quite a rivalry. I will say this though, Princeton and Dartmouth, are lately have been terrific, and before that, Penn had a quite a run, so in fact, a lot of years Penn and Harvard was the game for the Ivy League championship, which is the next to last game of the season. A lot of years, like in the 80s and 90s. So it goes back and forth. The Ivy League fans are there aren't that many of us, but we're intense. That much I'll say.
Yeah, it's a tremendous league. It's very interesting. I had a great opportunity probably about 10 years ago to go and tour the Yale Bowl and some of Yale's campus with a former player and a former coach that my wife's related to. And we got to get to experience. I got to talk to the former player, and I told him, I said, what was the biggest day, of your career, coming out of this Yale tunnel? What was the game that you remember the most coming out of there? He goes, the 2 times that we played Harvard here. That was the thing. So they feel the same way up at Yale. I'm sure that you folks at Harvard do too. So it's an interesting rivalry.
Well, we consider Yale our safety school. What can I tell you? Only kidding. Yeah. No, I mean, that one, I must say the other great thing is that I've had a real good chance to observe, and in some cases to meet some of the other Ivy coaches. And, it's a terrific group right now. I mean, they're the same, it's the same group as last season, which is really rare, right? To have nobody in a conference lose their jobs. And, but I think it's merited because it's a very impressive group of individuals, and they're really good teachers. That's the other thing that I like about all of them. Very, very, when you hear them talk, you feel like you're learning something from all of them, which is great. So, all of this has been very fascinating to me in my old age, getting to meet and greet, sit in the press box with with 22-year-olds or 19-year-olds who could be my grandchildren. It's great. It's a lot of fun.
Interesting. Well, let's get back to Coach Haughton. I'm sorry I took you down a couple rabbit holes there. Coach Haughton, he had some, the big game beating Yale early on in his career. Was that sort of the biggest game of his career, or was there some other games that maybe are equal to that, or maybe even surpassed it?
There were a couple of Yale games later on that Harvard won in big fashion, in convincing fashion. They won in 1914, I believe, was a 39-6, and the following year, also in 15, they won by a very big score. And when you scored 39 points in a game back then, that was like scoring 75 points today. It was a low scoring era. So for you to pile up that many touchdowns in a major game was awesome. And a lot of it was just that he had a well-drilled group that executed brilliantly, especially in their blocking. And they were just unstoppable. They were unstoppable. So they also won a major game in 1913 at the stadium, again against Yale, that in which one of the most famous players, a fellow named Charlie Brickley, kicked 5 field goals. Now, this had been done before, but never in as major a game with this kind of a spotlight. And Brickley, whom I call the Da Vinci of the drop kick, is still one of the greatest, if not the greatest, drop kickers in football history. I mean, we talked earlier about, Percy Haughton being a lost figure in a way. Drop kicking certainly is a lost art in football. But Brickley, who also could place kick as well, drop kicking was a crucial element in a team's attack back then. And Brickley was the greatest drop kicker. And he was from nearby Everett, Massachusetts. But he kicked 5 field goals at the stadium, and this received totally national coverage. It was almost like the Super Bowl, if somebody had done something great in the Super Bowl. And, so all these games were receiving total saturation coverage. And again, the whole Haughton legend got burnished with every year that he achieved this kind of result. And but those were some of the results that happened. And they did stick around one extra year in 1916, and Yale did win 6-3. So it wasn't foolproof. That's the nature of the beast. But anyway, that was when you read about the coverage about Brickley. Brickley was a god at that point. Brickley was like any great athlete. Joe Namath or Tom Brady or you name it. That's the level of celebrity that he had achieved.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that back in that era, the kickers and punters were sort of the stars of the teams, of the great teams, and like you say, like Brickley and Haughton before him, and Thorpe, and there's all these players, right? Because the kicking game and the punting game was so important to the offensive before the forward pass was really prevalent. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, and Haughton, was having been a great punter himself, really paid tremendous attention to it. What we today call the measurables. He was already onto it. He would put a stopwatch on his kickers to see how fast they would get the punt off. After the snap of the ball. And, that he drilled them to try to get it off, no less than like 1 5/7 seconds or something like that. I could be misquoting. The other thing that he was a fiend about was back then, covering kicks was a very big part of the game. And what he said to his kickers was, I want the ball kicked 40 yards. I'm not talking 41 yards, and I'm not talking 39 yards. When I say 40, I mean 40. And one of his greatest players, besides Brickley, a guy named Eddie Mahan, kicked one 60 yards, and Brickley yanked him Haughton yanked him from the game and said, that 60-yard punt does us no good at all because we can't cover 60 yards. That's the kind of guy he was. He was a nut. He was a bit of a nut. There's just no way around it.
Well, it's true. You hear about it all the time, even today, that punters out kicking their coverage. So
right.
he was onto something back then.
Oh, he definitely was. I mean, and he had, he wanted football played a certain way. And, a big part of the game was exchange of punts to gain territory, gain yardage. And the other thing is he loved exchange of punts and playing for the breaks, back then. Let the other team could fumble. They might throw an interception. If the rare forward pass, a Harvard guy could intercept it, and they would gain territory that way. And then they had Brickley to kick a field goal, 3-0 win. That was fine by him, but they had so much better material by that point than most of the other teams that they were winning by reasonably big scores. And they won, they were 33. They had a 33 game unbeaten streak from 1911 to 1915.
Wow.
And they had a couple of ties in there, but, they just outclassed other teams, so much better. And the team that beat them before the end of the beginning of the streak was Carlisle with Jim Thorpe. And Jim Thorpe put on a day for the ages back at at Harvard Stadium. And Haughton said, I've now seen the Superman in the flesh, and he was convinced. So, and Brickley and Haughton became good friends, great kickers. They do kicking contests and stuff. So, if there had been more of an organized pro football in the late teens and early 20s, there'd be have been a lot more money for those guys.
Interesting. Now, okay, besides the contributions that Coach Haughton did, for just his record at Harvard and winning some national championships in there, in the kicking game, what are some other contributions that you can sort of look back and say, Percy Haughton, he's a guy that started that or has a lot of responsibility for that. Some things that maybe in modern football that we should be thankful for to him.
Sure. I mean, I don't know about being thankful for, but the whole organization of practice, the way practices today are scripted to the minute. I don't know whether he started it, but he certainly popularized it. He had the players' helmets lined up, in front of at the field, right? Didn't want to waste a second. He gave out the players knew exactly what was going to be worked on that particular day. He'd had at 3:00 they were going to do such and such. At 3:15 they were going to do such and such. At 3:30 such and such. He broke the team down into 4 segments. He had the varsity, then an A, B, and C team, and it was a bit of a ladder in the sense that you could work your way up or work your way down depending as the year went on. Very big on drill and execution. We've heard a lot about Vince Lombardi telling his team to run the power sweep 11 times or until they got it right. Well, that was Percy Haughton did the same thing. He didn't have a big playbook. He had only 25 plays, but he could run them from 5 different formations. So he really had 125 plays. The other thing that he did was, I think, was very, very important. He decided at a certain stage that the future of football was not to the heavy guy. It was to the athletic guy. And that really, he figured that out early on, that again, he loved baseball players, but what he wanted was really the athletic guy, not that, or as what they called it back then, the 200-pound fat boy, which now we would call the 400-pound fat boy. But that was really important to the Harvard system, was to have really kind of raw-boned, great athletes who were fast, quick, as well as strong. Not a big guy on weight, working with the weights. Instead, he would rather guys ease off and come in rested and be keen rather than work them and scrimmage them to death in practice. So all these things that have become common and standard in most coaches, quivers today, are what are Haughton, a big part of the Haughton system. And because of Harvard's prominence, they got a lot of publicity. And then he wrote the book and even more of his stuff. And then the one other thing I should talk about, which I think is very important, was that he decided also that deception was going to be a very big feature of the game. And his teams were very, very skilled in deceiving the opponent. He really wanted the opponent to sweat hard and worry about what the next play is. He loved it when passing came in, because he would pitch out to one of the triple threat backs that they had, and the triple threat back would hold the ball up, and the defensive backs were wondering, what's going to happen here? Is it going to be a run? Is it going to be a pass? What's going to go on? And he loved that. He wanted that guy on an island just worrying and letting the Harvard guys get the jump on them. And again, this was all not totally new, but again, became much more standard with what he did.
Huh, very interesting. And when you say we should be thankful to it, I think us as fans and the players themselves should be thankful for having the organized practices. And I'm sure coaches today sort of take it for granted, but somebody had to start doing that and organize those and having the drills and everything. And I think that's definitely something that you can hang Percy Haughton's hat on to credit him for that. So I think that is something to be thankful for. So
yeah, and he even had, like, each week, was given a name, would be like Joy Week, right before the Yale game. He wanted the team really loose before the Yale game. He wanted them to have fun that week, not to be worrying about the game. But anyway, he had the whole thing scripted away, and most coaches do that now. Most coaches now have things planned, have the entire season planned out. And again, this was, very contrary to what the image of football was, of a bunch of guys in a scrum, and it's fascinating for me to read it. It was fascinating for me to read about it because, again, I had a total image of guys in a scrum, guys with a lot of hair in a scrum. And then you read about it and you see, what a method that this guy had. He called it human chess, right? And it's just the whole cerebral aspect of the game was brought to the fore by Percy.
I'm sure if he could see the game being played today, he would really be excited. Having all the other formations and the passing game being more prevalent, and what a chess match it is today. That's for sure.
Can't make the case that he's any better than Rockne or Frank Leahy or Bud Wilkinson. You just go down the line of all the tremendous coaches in college football. But I do think that he's lost to history in a way. And again, I think this is a big part of it is because he was early. He was too early, right? If there had been newsreel footage of him, he would have a better chance of being really famous. Now, I would say that he went to Columbia in the 1920s. He took the job there and was starting to build that program. And one day after practice, he said he wasn't feeling too well. He lay down and he died of a heart attack. He was 48 years old.
Oh, wow.
If he had been in New York, where he was, if he had been able to continue in New York through the roaring 20s and into the 30s with all the celebrity of the New York press, then maybe we would all be talking a lot more about it. So that I think that's kind of what happened. But I do think, given his record and given the various innovations that I've talked about, that he should be better known and should be given more credit than he has. Again, he's in the Hall of Fame. You're in the Hall of Fame. Can't really get much more credit than that. But as I say, in terms of like the average fan knowing who he is, very, very few would know today. And it's a shame. It's a shame because I do think he was a very important figure in football.
Well, that's why I'm glad that there's people out there like you that are preserving the football history, and we thank you for that, and preserving, Coach Percy Haughton and some of his great contributions, his history, everything that he did for the game and for Harvard football, and makes him a legend. And we're glad that somebody recorded that, and that person's you, sir, and we thank you for that.
Well, a labor of love for me. Going back through the archives was wonderful. One more thing to add. I was able to get back into the archives, and after a certain amount of time, you go back into the student folders, and I was able to see various things about the players, including Percy, who had been a player, of course, including their grades, which was fascinating as a former student myself. And the other thing that I saw, a very sobering aspect was that I think that we had one of the earliest cases, not recorded, but the earliest cases of CTE with one of the players, a guy named Percy Wendell, who was a terrific fullback for Harvard in the 1910-11 seasons, and he was known as the human bullet for his head first running style. And as time went on, Percy Wendell started to falter, and finally in the late 20s, and he had served in World War I, so they ascribed some of his problems to the war. But in the late 20s, he was described as being not the man he used to be, kind of a euphemism, and he died at age 42. And reading between the lines, it sure sounds like CTE, right? We don't know for sure, but boy, every single symptom was there, and very sobering about the game. And I'm sure that he was not the only one suffering from that illness back then, especially given that they were not either not wearing helmets or wearing the leather helmets. And you run into that, and so that takes you aback when you're seeing it in the files. I also saw in the files players who, almost all of them from that era, went on to World War I and served in World War I. And one of the players, who was Brickley's backup, got killed in action. And when you read this stuff, you feel like these guys. You've been on the football team with these guys, and then you see that they're gone. And at age 23, you see photos of them, and it's heartbreaking. It really is. And,
true heroes, and we thank them for the service, like we do everybody else that's fought for our country over the years. But true heroes. Right. That had to be a scary war.
No, that was terrible. Mm-hmm. I mean, and pointless. But anyway, that's a whole nother topic that we could get on someday. But right. But anyway, the whole aspect though of the game back then, so many things that pull you into the present. And again, that was to me, I keep using the word fascinating, but it was fascinating to me, mesmerizing, really. It's a good thing that the library closed at 5:00, or I just would have stayed there all night, because it is. I mean, I'm sure everybody who has done this kind of research, can relate. So, but again, just fascinating.
I fully understand it. I tell you that. So why don't you tell us again the name of your book and where folks can get a copy of it?
Okay. The name again is The Coach Who Strangled the Bulldog: How Harvard's Percy Haughton Beat Yale and Reinvented Football. The publisher is Rowman and Littlefield. Rowman spelled Rowman. It's on Amazon. Very, very available on Amazon. And it's available in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. So no excuse for people not to buy it and read it. And there will be a test. No, only kidding. So yeah, but it's readily available on Amazon.
Okay, great. And folks, if you're driving a car or something, can't write down the information right now, we will put it in the show notes of this podcast. Just look at the notes. It'll also be on Pigskin Dispatch for this article that's going to accompany the podcast. So you can find it either place and get you connected to Dick Friedman and his wonderful book. Sir, do you have any social media or anything you'd like to share where people can keep up on what you're doing if you're writing anything new?
My website is under reconstruction right now. Okay. And when it is ready, I am going to send you a note, and you can put it in the show notes.
Absolutely.
But we have one of the many things that's fallen by the wayside during these last couple of years has been reconstruction of the website. So it will happen, and I am noodling with other book ideas, and I can guarantee you that it will not be about Harvard football if I write another book. Enough already, I've written enough about Harvard football in my lifetime. But I've thought about other things too. Now that I'm on the West Coast, there might be a West Coast oriented story about the early days of football. And, we'll see. It could be something else. You never know. But as I say, it's been a tremendous project for me, the book. And I, like a lot of people, I was kind of wondering what the heck I was going to do after I retired. And it turned out I never really retired, and so it's been, so that's where I am. But it's been fascinating and very enjoyable to meet people like yourself and other people, who are in the world of college football history, which is a great history. And my dad went to Michigan, so I had heard a lot about that, and he played freshman football, and he's a little guy like myself. And the freshmen back then at Michigan were pretty much just cannon fodder. And he was very proud, though, that he got knocked on his rear end by a fellow named Gerald R. Ford Jr. And he said Jerry Ford was a tremendous football player. And for my father to say that, my father was a staunch liberal Democrat. So Jerry Ford must have really been great. So
yeah, he definitely was a great football player, as well as in politics, as we know. Now, did your father play for Fritz Chrysler then? Is that?
No, the year that he played freshman ball was under a guy named Harry Kipke, Kipke. Yeah. Okay. So
he had to be pretty close, so I'll bet.
Yeah. And he was in they were great when my father was a freshman. Then they had several down seasons, and then my father graduated, and then Tommy Harmon came in the late 30s, and they were great again. So my father would tell me about the great Tommy Harmon runs against Penn and schools like that. So he got me very interested at an early age.
Harmon was definitely a great player too. So that's very interesting. Well, sir, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you coming on and preserving the football history and sharing it with us. Folks, like we said, you can find Dick Friedman's books. We'll have the information in the show notes and on pigskindispatch.com. And soon we'll have information on Dick's website too, that you can go and see what he's got going on here in the near future. So Dick Friedman, thank you very much for joining us in the Pigpen on Percy Haughton.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Darren.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
It was just another ordinary day in the offices of the Pittsburgh Guardian newspaper circa 1924. But for Marla Delft, assistant editor, everything was about to change. For she was about to discover the awesome attractiveness of Row 1 brand retro sports paraphernalia items thanks to Orville Mulligan, sports writer.
And there it is.
Wow, Orville, that's really the bee's knees.
Isn't it just? A poster-sized replica of the actual 1909 World Series program cover.
I can see that. But where did you get it? And where'd you get it framed?
I ordered it from the Row 1 website, where over 6,000 items of sports memorabilia from the 1880s to the 1990s are available for reproduction, in multiple sizes and in several different materials, with over a dozen styles of frame to choose from for prints like this.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Delft would love to put up more of these in the office. But I'm equally as sure they're beyond this newspaper's budget.
Not at all, my dear Marla. See for yourself. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. Oh my, these are good prices. Oh, and look at this stuff. Oklahoma-Nebraska football, college basketball art, Michael Jordan items.
And so it
retro
was that
sports
Marla Delft
advertisement
discovered the
flowers.
splendiferous magic of Row 1 sports memorabilia, arts, and prints. You can too by visiting sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. That's ROW1 today for access to the full Row 1 catalog of gallery prints and gifts like t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, telephone cases, coffee mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Act today for 15% discount off all prints with coupon code SHN15 and 20% off all other items with coupon code SHN20 at checkout. And keep your dial locked to the Sports History Network for the exciting chronicles of the 1920 sports world in Orville Mulligan, sports writer. Coming soon.